I gotta sneeze. It's the turbos, man. Bless you. Thank you. There, now it looks like that road keeps going. Cool beans. I notice if you do the turbo, you usually don't do a second sneeze. Really? Huh. Yeah, I guess you're right. Okay, that's weird. I don't know if I like that. That's definitely strange. Yeah, that is definitely strange. Huh.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
Oops. Nice city. Thanks, time. Dr. Death, 30-month resub. That's weird, dudes. That's weird that happens. Cool. Is Rotterdam similar to Amsterdam? Considering they're near each other, yeah, I would say that they're kind of similar. I think that might be. I mean, okay, Erudite, the difference... So Rotterdam, they have similar architectures, but like, okay, because they're near each other, but Amsterdam tends to be a little bit older. The reason why Amsterdam tends to be a little bit older is, well... Hold on. Yeah, that's the reason. Rotterdam got bombed. Rotterdam was in the way of the Germans when they were advancing during World War II. It was in the way. So, Germany was trying to invade France. Okay? That's what they were trying to do in 1940. They were trying to get at Paris. Now, the quickest way to get at Paris would be from right here, from like Strasbourg, right here. Right? And you'd go that way, right? That's the quickest way. But here's the thing. The French built this thing called the Maginot Line. France basically built a defensive armament up the entire border between them and Germany and them and Italy. They kept it open via Switzerland, and they kept it open to Belgium, right? Because they weren't fighting Belgium. So the Germans, they didn't want to fight against that big armed area, right? So what they did was this. They went from Dortmund over here, and they went this way. They went around it. They just went around the damn thing. That's it. They just went around it. And if you look, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Brussels, they're all in the way. They're in the way of the advancing line. Amsterdam was not. So Germany needed to invade the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. These three countries form a triangle called Benelux. So literally Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Benelux. So the Germans said, look, we're going to invade you. Surrender, or we will bomb the crap out of you. We will literally level your cities. And the Netherlands said, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. Why would you be negotiating if you were going to do that? And the Germans said, we don't want to waste time with you because we're trying to invade France. But seriously, if you don't surrender, we're going to bomb the trash out of you. And the Netherlands said, fine, do it. Oops. They thought they were bluffing. They weren't bluffing. They literally leveled Rotterdam. They leveled it. There was no city left. They bombed it back to the Stone Age. The Germans bombed Pearl Harbor, not Rotterdam. Not now. He's on a roll. You won't do that. So the Germans absolutely leveled. They leveled it. And the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg ended up surrendering. And from there, Germany basically went unimpeded right to Paris and took it instantly. They knew that Paris was basically the hub of everything else. None of this other stuff really matters too much. So they went right for Paris and cut the head right off of the snake. This idea to just plow through and just keep going, to move quickly, right? That idea basically came as a way to avoid what happened during World War I. During World War I, everybody got stuck in trenches and essentially made a stalemate. Anybody that poked their head out of the trenches got blown away by a machine gun or a piece of artillery or whatever. So the Germans didn't want to get stuck in entrenched warfare, because in World War I, the Central Powers basically did the same thing. They tried to swing around and go through. And then they ended up getting stuck in northern France. And then there was a huge fight. They basically, for 4 years, just pushed off of each other. The Germans were trying to avoid having that happen again. They were trying to avoid a stalemate. Stalemates in military tactics can get very expensive very quickly in terms of equipment and personnel. So the Germans were trying to avoid it. So what they did was they made sure that their tanks moved quickly, and the way they set up their divisions was that they would move fast. They were mechanized units, so basically trucks and fast-moving tanks. This idea was championed by the guy that was running Germany from 1933 to 1945. You know who I'm talking about. It was championed by him, and he basically called it Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. So fast attack. Basically get in there, 1-2 punch, done. That's how Germany was able to take over so many countries in the late 30s, early 40s, because that's what they did. You couldn't stop them. They just flood you in with fast attack units that are well equipped, and there's nothing you can do. Great, they blew through the lines. Or you have a big force. If they blow through the lines and they go right to your country's capital and take it, what are you going to do? You have no leadership now. It was pretty damn effective. They were still learning from Napoleonic tactics. Yep. Yeah, exactly, consort. So they needed to blitz. They needed to get in quick to avoid getting stuck in the trenches. So that's why they went. That's part of the reason why they went through Benelux. They did that on purpose. And part of that was getting the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg to surrender. And they bombed Rotterdam back to the Stone Age. So if you look at Rotterdam, it tends to be a little bit more modern. You see a lot more modern stuff. Amsterdam was not in the way, so they just went around it. They didn't bomb it. Actually, they were going to. They were going to bomb Rotterdam. They had threatened Utrecht and Amsterdam and Nijmegen, if I'm remembering right. And they basically said, we're going to bomb all of this if you don't surrender. And they're like, you wouldn't do that. And then they did. That's why the architectures are so damn different, because Rotterdam was leveled in 1940. They paradropped Nijmegen to... Yeah, that's right. But whatever. You get what I'm trying to say. We're getting into semantics here. That's why the architectures are different. Oh, now I want to play Hearts of Iron. Damn it. I think what also decided the Dutch response to Germany was that the Netherlands was able to stay neutral during World War I, so they tried to do the same thing during World War II. That has a lot to do with it, Dapper, yeah. They tried to say, like, hey, we're not part of this. And the Germans say, yeah, the hell you aren't. The hell you aren't. Surrender. And they're like, no, we're not part of this. And they're like, yeah, you are. Have you played the new Hearts of Iron DLC? I have not, Pilch. No, I haven't. I haven't touched Hearts in a good while, actually. Actually, dude, I was visiting Brimo's family last weekend, right? And one of Brimo's uncles was like, hey, Jay, have you ever heard of a game called Hearts of Iron? And I'm like, yes. He's like, I'm retired, and, I really like World War II history. Do you think Hearts of Iron would be a good game? And I'm like, yes. He's like, yeah, okay, I bought it and I tried playing it, but it doesn't, I don't really understand what's going on. I'm like, yes. It's a tough game. You touch Hearts every day. Ooh. Yeah, the best way to learn is to watch somebody play. But yeah, not Nijmegen so much. But yeah, that's why the architectures are very, very different. We're gonna need 8 trains, should be enough. Yep. So, yeah, pretty interesting stuff. You ever play Panzer General? I love that game. Negative. Someone say Hearts? Oh. Why isn't there anything there? Go. No, that's a park there. I don't want that. Or at least I don't want it over the park. Yeah, there we go. Now let's do that. Just do that. I'd have to say that this looks the part, dudes. Not bad. Yeah, Aqualex, if I'm not explaining everything that I'm doing in Hearts of Iron and why I'm doing it, which takes a good amount of energy, explaining your every move, people get confused. They get confused real fast. Have you ever played a pencil and paper version of Wargame? Harpoon comes to mind. I think you'd be good at it. No. No, I haven't. What's with the water square? It's a water source super that I'm kind of containing with seawall. Because if I don't, it'll try to flood this whole place. It's a lot of work, dude. I'm doing a lot of work here. This is good. It's coming along. Pretty happy. Trash seems to be a big problem. We'll add more trash trucks. More trash trucks. I don't know why, but lighting up the tracks seems like the right thing to do, especially around the station. Canalsterdam? Oh, Madge. Madge. You filthy, dirty weeberino. Yeah, that looks right. You're moving back to Washington in December? Oh, cool. Hopefully you enjoyed your time. Hopefully you enjoyed your time in Weberland. You got orders for your next duty station. That's cool. You must be bummed you're leaving Japan, though. Half and half? Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Alright, guys. Do we wanna play Kerbal? Let's go check what the Kerbal challenge is. I'm gonna take a quick break. But I really, really appreciate this. This is good, man. We made some really good progress here. Thanks, Shirley. Yeah, let's play some KSP. All right. So I'm going to take 5 here real quick. Fill up the coffee again. And, yeah, we'll go from there. I'll put on Starbase Live. In the meantime, we can see what's going on with the pad. Here. I will be right back 1 second. And... switches over to Kerbal 2. And we'll go from there. We got an AMA to go over too. An AMA to go over. We got a bunch of stuff. So they're definitely surveying the damage up there though, huh? And then we have that Unity video too. I'm not sure how we'll go about doing that, but anyway, I'll be right back 1 second. Just gonna grab a quick bite here, and then I'll be back. It's a Slim Jim. All right. We ready to roll? Ready to roll out. What are they doing here? Anything? They're definitely inspecting it. Man, that thing got pretty blanked. But yeah. It doesn't look too bad. Yeah, I mean, apart from it almost blowing out the foundation, dude, I mean, they're adding a second staircase. Yeah. Is the staircase scaffolding, though? Hmm. 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 I see it. Oh, that's just the wind. Okay. I heard the wind gust and I thought something popped. I'm like, okay. We're basically taking a nuke to the face. It's pretty good. Yeah, no, it ain't bad. Yeah, you know, I was thinking about it. We were talking about it like anything you put under there, you're going to lose. I'm thinking, you know, that steel plate with a triangular diverter, like basically a conic diverter, it basically looks like a cone. That might do it. I mean, the cone's going to pretty much need to be refurbished after every launch. It's going to get the paint scored off at the very least, right? But it also ain't bad. Yeah, I saw the new Glen pictures in the 2-cat building. Yep, yep. You like the idea of a cone with an ablative material. Yeah. Yeah, Shano. It just kind of, guys, it kind of just feeds into what I'm talking about. It kind of feeds into what I'm talking about. Anything you put under there, you're going to lose. Like, the steel plates that SpaceX does have an idea about might do it. Maybe. Maybe. Like, it's possible, but yeah, who knows? Look at those guys climbing the scaffolding. Would you say the problem is more thermal or material force? I think it's a force problem. I think it's a pressure problem. Heat didn't make that hole. No, no. The rocket engine's firing made that hole. So don't get me wrong. You still have to deal with heat. And if you could take some of the energy out of those gases, if you take the heat energy out of those gases, they're not going to make as much pressure, right? Because you cool it down, less pressure, pretty straightforward stuff. Now, that could do it. It's possible. But yeah, I think that, so they're kind of intertwined. But yeah. What are they going to do about the big hole? Just fill it up again? Yeah, Fred, pretty much. They're going to install, believe it or not, the parts, and I don't know, dude, like, that's the strange part. The parts of the pad that the rocket bored a hole out is exactly where SpaceX wants to put a water deluge system, which is kind of strange. I guess if you want your rocket to do the excavation work, you're going to save some cash that way. Any reason why they haven't made an actual flame trench? Yeah, there are multiple reasons. You can't really go build down here because the water table is too high. You dig down a couple of feet, you're going to hit water because they're right by the ocean, right? I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. Second part about that is if you can't build a flame trench, you got to build a diverter. But I'll be honest with you. Nobody's ever designed a diverter that's designed to divert 15 million pounds of thrust and all the heat that comes with 15 million pounds of thrust. SpaceX is in uncharted territory here. It's not like they could turn to NASA and be like, hey, what do? NASA's built flame trenches that could withstand up to 8. Well, 8.8 if you really want to be technical, right? That's 39A and 39B. And 39B held up pretty dang well for SLS, but you got to understand, even the flame trench at 39B, that's 8.8 million pounds of thrust. Super Heavy has double that almost. Double. Dude, if Super Heavy had launched out of 39B, like just in some alternative universe, let's say, it would have obliterated that flame trench too. There'd be a big hole in the ground where the flame trench used to be. Like, either that or the flame trench would have ablated, right? The shuttle and SLS did that. SLS damaged the pad. The shuttle damaged 39A and 39B all the time. Interestingly enough. Yeah, Aqualix. Yeah, I mean, if you flow enough water through a steel plate down there, it should do it. Yeah. They're installing a water fountain under the pad shimway. But yeah. That's the reason. Anyway, let's flip over to KSP. Did we get a new KSP challenge, dudes? I don't know if we did. I don't know, maybe. Dragon? Make a dragon? Alright, well, let me go take a look. Let's see. Kerbal. We also have an AMA to go through, dude. I mean, Pilch, it's not about water affecting the thermal properties of concrete. It's a rocket engine firing into water inside of a flame trench, dude. Think about that for a second. You could literally water hammer your flame trench, and then you start back at square one. You start back with a crater. Anyway, so let's go over here. What do we have? Where's the challenge? Okay, hey, Kerbonauts. Based off of real build test the devs did within KSP2, we are challenging the community to build a dragon. Build a dragon. Stretch, build a dragon that can breathe fire. Build a dragon and launch it into orbit. Build a dragon with all the previous goals and fly it to another body in the Kerbal system. Oh. I thought they were talking about the capsule. So the mythical beast, not the spacecraft. I think for Starship, we need more of a Sea Dragon launching way. Yeah, maybe. So we have an AMA and a dev update to go through. I don't know how on board I am for actually building a creature. Dingleberg, you said put that 3D modeling degree to the test. I'm not a character modeler. I don't do good modeling organic things. All right, so do you guys want to do the Discord AMA first, or do we want the dev update? There was a super technical GDC panel talking about how they made the planets. I mean, we have that too. If you guys want to tee that up, I have that in the wings here. If we want to watch that, a lot of apparently technical. Well, it's a lot of technical stuff, but I mean, should be pretty cool. But who will build Trogdor? Oh, God. But he was still Trogdor! Burninating the countryside, burninating the peasants. Alright. I'm kind of interested in the dev AMA. It is an hour. Yeah, let's check it out. Let's see what happens here. All right.
Hello. Oh boy, here we go. All right. First off, if everyone could please silence your cell phones. I don't know if you're allowed to record this, so I'm sorry. I saw a ton of cell phones go up. Yes, other than that, hello, and welcome to our panel discussion. Houston, we have a planet, the spherical terrain of Kerbal Space Program 2. All right, so first off, I'm gonna introduce everyone on our panel here. Right to my left, we have Sung Campbell, who is our principal environment artist. Next, we have Mike Azanero, who is our software engineer 2, specializing in graphics. Then Brandon Orden, who's our senior environment artist. And finally, John Cialetti, who is our tech artist, senior tech artist.
Cialetti.
And I'm Christina Ness. I'm the art director. All right, so first, audience participation. Can I get a show of hands of who has played Kerbal Space Program? Oh, awesome, excellent. Okay, wait, keep your hands up. Raise your hands if you just know what Kerbal Space Program is. Okay, excellent, perfect, thank you. All right, so for those of you folks with your hands down, I'd just like to play our early access gameplay trailer so you can get an idea of what Kerbal Space Program is all about.
All right, we can skip through that. We know this.
All right, that's Kerbal Space Program 2. It is a realistic spaceflight simulator where players can build, launch, and crash custom vehicles with the goal of exploring the universe alongside the strange and wacky Kerbals who run the space program. And bottom left corner are the little green men themselves. Kerbal Space Program 2 is a sequel to the critically acclaimed and beloved Kerbal Space Program 1, and this new installment is dedicated to pushing the depiction of real-world scientific concepts in an engaging and approachable way. Before we get too deep into panel land, there is some quick basic terminology I'd like to establish here, because I think you're going to hear it pop up and get thrown around a lot during our talk. So can I get one last show of hands? Who here knows what celestial body means or describes? Okay. I love an intelligent audience. Excellent. So while it's tempting for us to use the word planet to describe celestial bodies, our Kerbaler system, where the game takes place, also contains a parent star, a gas giant, dwarf planets, moons. So you're going to hear us say CB a lot, and that's what it means. So let's just get into it. Guys, hi, welcome.
Hi.
I'm kind of curious, just broad strokes, what were the biggest challenges you had when making tools for spherical planets?
Yeah, Fruta.
Yeah, I can start on that. Kind of just another point of reference, similar to the CB terminology, another kind of reference term, another kind of term that we were going to throw around a lot in this talk. And if it's, the one thing you'll learn today is the difference between local space and scaled space. We're going to say it a lot. So just kind of talk about that really quick. Scaled space is the version of the planet you're going to be seeing when you're far away. It's usually like a lower resolution version of the planet that's meant to be seen, again, from far away. Whereas the local space planet or the local space terrain is what you see when you're on the ground. It's the simulated terrain that you can actually walk on and crash into. So with that in mind, when we're talking about challenges when simulating terrain on the scale that we are, especially if it's on top of it being spherical, the main thing that starts out is like all default Unity tools and most game making tools and terrain making tools all assume you're making a game on a flat horizon. And it also makes the assumption that your coordinate y is always up. And on a spherical planet, that isn't always the case. And this affects everything between trying to place objects in a scene or trying to move around a scene. And again, like any kind of conventional terrain kind of making software is not really applicable. So we've had to make it our own in order to overcome this challenge here.
Yeah, on the more technical side of that, definitely shape and scale are the two biggest issues. So like Brendan mentioned, shape, we tried a couple assets from the asset store during the process of development, and most of those, even outside just engine-specific built-in stuff, are also either designed for very small spherical planets, or they're designed for just very flat, large terrains. So you'll hear we'll be bringing up floating point and floating point precision during this talk, and that's like the biggest hurdle for almost anything related to anything of this scale. So like Kerbal in the image is around 600,000 in-game Unity units, and that's not an exaggeration. There's no like faking there. It's literally that far away. So whenever it comes to do anything, lighting, shadows, shading, clouds, water, you name it on the planet, we have to factor that into it.
And because we're dealing with multiple views in the game, when the environment team is demanding tools, requesting tools from the graphics team, they have to solve for not just one view like most games. They have to solve for, make sure it looks good when you're on the ground and when you're in space. So any issues or tools requests like lighting, shadows, atmospheric scatter, they have to solve for both perspective and make sure the transitions are working well.
Yeah, and I think the last thing to add on to that is that this, sorry, I should talk more in the mic here. This process of making spherical terrains is not often done in a lot of games, and there's no real standard for it. We looked at a lot of examples of previous other games like No Man's Sky, Star Citizen, and like even Outer Wilds is a planet that all has a lot of spherical terrain as well, and each of them has a different kind of problem space and a different kind of game they're trying to make. And because we are building this game like on top of the framework of KSP1, and we have this framework of scaled space and local space, again, our solution had to be unique, and we couldn't just like, oh, this set works and we could just use that. So yeah, we've had to adapt to that.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned earlier the sheer size of Kerbal. I believe Kerbal has about like a 600-kilometer radius. Like, for you guys, what were the art challenges that you had to solve when making a planet and celestial bodies of such great scale?
Yeah, so I don't know if I, okay, no, we're good. So yeah, floating point is definitely the biggest one. So if you look in the bottom left and the top left pictures we have up there, when we're talking about Unity, and if we were to literally just put the planet at say 0, 0, 0, and then be on the surface of Kerbal, you get artifacts like the bottom left. So that's floating point precision. Basically, to describe it for those that are not as
rounding,
technically known on the graphic side, probably for that, floating point is how computers represent numbers. And basically, to represent a full range of very high precision numbers, you can either have a very big whole number or a very big decimal. And then anywhere in between, you get good numbers. But once you go too far to one end, so in our case, really big whole numbers, you lose a lot of precision. So that impacts everything in our game. So like I was saying, in the default Unity scene, if you were to just drag an object that far, you'll get, that's not like a stylized sphere or a mesh. That's just a regular sphere. The same with the cube, same with the rock. We get artifacts like that. And same on the top left, we get the stair-stepping of the terrain. That was an issue we had to solve on the local space planet, where the height map resolution, when you expand it out on the sphere and project it, the resolution just isn't high enough to create a proper high-resolution planet, at least initially.
It's a hard problem.
So for that height map there, it's using a height map of 16-bit depth precision. So if you don't know what that is, like essentially a height map determined, like to get like a smooth height map, we use 16-bit precision images, which have 0 to about a little over 65,000 ranges of black to white colors. And even that extreme range is not enough to, like, at the scale that we're building these planets, to create smooth hills. So we would find these stair steps in our terrain.
Yeah, so in order to solve that, we had to implement our own sort of, not a new graphics taking like bilinear filtering and Gaussian blur and those type of blending operations between nearby vertices, so we can share information without needing to take our height map and then build it to like an 8K height map or like a 16 by 16K height map for each planet. So that allowed us to maintain the performance of not having insanely large textures, but also resolve some of that stair stepping.
The art team wanted 16K.
Another challenge here is looking at what textures look like when they're height blended at a high altitude. So you see there's two images there in the middle for one that says height blend at the top and alpha blend at the bottom. So we found that, well, when you mix two ground textures together, typically height blending them together is a way to go because you get a lot of cool interactions between materials that have different height maps, and so you see they kind of intermix depending, like you'll have like snow that sits on top of rock or grass that sits on top of dirt, and it looks natural. And it looks good when you're up close, but as soon as we started flying anywhere between 50 to 100 meters into the air, we immediately started to see like tiling artifacts, or like you could see like the repetition of the height map interactions between two materials pretty readily, and it was very distracting. So what we did to solve this problem was the artist requested a kind of switch so that we can, at a certain altitude above the surface of the terrain, we can say go from height blending, render the terrain with height blending, and instead render it with alpha blending, which instead of seeing the two materials interact together by height blending, you would instead do a smooth blend, which kind of solves two problems. One, it helps the tiling artifacts kind of go away, and it, again, gives us control of when that occurs at a certain altitude, but it also, like, another thing we're going to be touching on a lot is one of our biggest goals was to help make the transition between when you're going from the ground all the way to space. We want to make that feel as seamless and as cohesive as possible. So that was another thing where it helped.
Yeah, so let's get into kind of what our current art pipeline looks like. So when you're starting to create Celestial Body for KSP2, what was the first couple steps?
Yeah, right. So the first steps involve our design team and Nate Simpson, our creative director. The team figures out the concept for a planet and what we like to call the landing puzzle for the planet. And landing puzzle is kind of our local term for essentially the player experience of, or what we want the player to kind of learn and take away by interacting with a certain CB or celestial body. I use the Mun as an example here, so you see a screenshot of the Mun on the top right. Its landing puzzle was all about teaching the player to land on a part of the planet based on its appearance, based on the appearance of the scaled space asset. So like looking at the planet, I'm not sure how well it's visible on the slide there, but like you can see that there's kind of two big coloration areas of the Mun. There's like the darker, the mare of the Mun, and then there's the cratery kind of lighter gray area of the Mun. And so from a glance, you may be able to tell that like the dark gray spots are a lot smoother, a lot more like flatter, whereas the cratery areas are a lot more mountainous and rougher, have more slopes. So the players kind of like intuit like, oh, maybe I can land in the areas where it's smoother, and that will give me an easier time when I'm trying to land on this planet. And
literally
it's
what
kind of meant to be a very gentle,
missions.
because it's the first celestial body that they're going to be landing that's outside of Kerbal. It's kind of like the first baby steps of kind of teaching the player landing somewhere easy based on, and picking a landing spot that's intentional. And kind of talking more about like the process of creating a planet. If we're carrying over a planet from KSP1, what we want to do is we aim to preserve what's cool about the first planet, or the KSP1 planet, and essentially yes and it to while looking at its real world analogs. So like we preserve the cool stuff, like there's this picture on there of the mole hole. It's a whole thing. It's basically a graphical glitch from the KSP1 on Moho that was.
We purposely had to make a graphical glitch.
But yeah, it's like things like that from the first game that players love, we want to preserve. When we're doing this next pass on these planets, like again, we're looking at the real world analogs to again try to bring a lot more realism and fidelity in terms of its detail to its surface. So for the or the other planets in that image there, like Moho's analog is Mercury, so we looked at a lot of Mercury. For Elu, on the bottom left, we looked at Pluto. On the top left is my very messy reference sheet for Eve, which its analog is Venus. So there's a lot of really cool reference for that, of photos of Venus, along with like any geography that is similar to that kind of terrain type.
Yeah, in the reference picture, we make sure that we get good reference from like scale space to mid-level and all the way to the ground.
I visited a good majority of them,
planets.
Pop, believe it or not.
And because we're inheriting KSP1 planets, for KSP2, you might wonder if we ever went thought about going through the route of like a random planet generator. And while it sounds like it'd be easy for us artists to just have sliders, and hit the easy button, unfortunately, so inheriting KSP1 lore, we went to the path of being handcrafted.
Awesome. Okay, so moving right along, we talked a little bit earlier about scaled and local space.
Interesting that he used lore as the reason why they're handcrafting planets. Something's going on here. I have a feeling that the monuments in KSP2 are there for a really good reason. There's some lore here. They added some kind of story into KSP. Very interested to see what happens with that.
Can you all explain the differences in scaled and local space and why it's important to preserve those two reads in KSP2?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. The scaled versus local space transition that you see here was inherited by KSP1. So the biggest level of detail that you see from far away is our scaled space mesh, which is a traditionally modeled mesh that you saw from the previous concepts. The artists take a look there and get as much of the big picture detail that they can.
Dude, look
and
at
then
the
as you
resolution
approach
go
the
down
planet,
as you
the
go
local
higher.
space
See that?
dithers in.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
as you can see, this image, it's actually coming out, but from a far distance, you get a lot of almost like low-level quad generation. And as you move closer and closer, we tessellate the mesh more and more to get a higher level of fidelity in the terrain. So also in this space is where all the physics quads are generated. We wanted a high level of detail for physics quads because when you interact with the terrain,
That's
land a
cool.
vessel, and leave, we wanted it to mirror the actual look of the terrain as close as we could. And things like our ocean also follow this sort of tessellation method where at a far distance, the ocean is like very low level resolution, and as you get closer and closer, it becomes very high in detail.
So this GIF over here is a very good example as to why, if you're playing KSP, it's going to bottleneck the crap out of your CPU. All right, check this out. Let me just back it up just a little bit. We'll back up 20 seconds. See here. All right, see as you get further and further away from the planet? See how all of that is all changing all at once? The CPU is basically in charge of changing all of this. It's saying, okay, we're this distance away, make this lower res. The graphics card has no problem changing it to lower res, but the CPU doesn't like doing all of this all at once. That right there is why the frames are a little weird in KSP right now. Because of all this resolution changing all at once. Watch. See it all changing? That's why KSP runs slow right now. See it all of that all changing all at once is bottlenecking the CPU. See that? That's why it's super interesting. That shows exactly the reason why. Look at all those, now don't get me wrong, it's not the resolution of the mesh. Any graphics card can take that, no problem. It's not all the damn triangles, it's all the triangle mesh geometry changing. That's really important to understand. See them all changing? Everything's all changing all at once. That croaks the CPU pretty badly. They're trying to fix this right now. Well, not trying. They're working towards it. I'm wondering if they're going to talk about it. So I'll shut up for a second and go from there.
Since the ocean is like very low level resolution, and as you get
We can
Like,
go over here.
they, in the first step of the art pipeline, they mentioned they do the scale space first and then local space, when you would think it might be more intuitive to make the local space planet and then just generate the scaled one from it. But
Well, once again, Adamak, it's not the tessellation that's like the tessellated mesh is not a big deal. You can go, it's going from low res to high res is what's bottlenecking it. And the interesting thing is that they use the same type of PQS is what it's called, procedural quaternion system, as KSP1, but with much better texture resolution and higher resolution geometry. That's the reason why it lags, because they're making, they'll probably talk about it, they're making these high-res planets using KSP1's LOD generator, basically. And it's bottlenecking the game. They're working on a new version called CBTS right now. I forget what it, continual binary trans something or other. I forget what it's called. The GPU is showing it, and the CPU is making it happen. Okay, Maverick, yeah. Think about it like this, dude. if you have a printer that's printing pictures, okay? The GPU would be like if you have a printer that can print color and it can print a really nice high-res picture. The GPU is how good the print head works, and the CPU is how fast it can crank out these pictures. Say you want to print 100 pictures. It needs to go faster. Right now, Kerbal has a very high-res, so it has a really nice printer, but that printer takes a while to spit out pieces of paper, right? That's a good way to think about it. The GPU is just there with basically making the geometry. The CPU, it's your CPU's job in Kerbal to place that geometry where it needs to go, if that makes any sense. And NVIDIA represents the high-cost ink, yeah.
Just because of the way we wanted to design the landing, it needs to be a good read from the start, and the way we did the texturing for the local space planet just pulls straight from the scaled space generated textures. So when they come up with a really good read for that scaled space look, we can then take those textures, apply them to the procedural texturing and procedural tessellation system of the local space, and that gives us a pretty accurate one-to-one matching of whatever it looks like in scaled space is what it's going to look like when you're close to the ground.
And then with that too,
yeah,
back and forth because you design the scaled
real-time
space
tessellation
to make
change
the local space, but then
with
if
U5.
there are tools
it's pretty
for
fascinating
things that we'll
stuff,
get into, that do tessellate the ground very significantly, it then can be baked back up to the scaled space to help the scaled space read.
Yeah, as an arrow. Speaking of that GIF in the top right corner, how are we simulating the terrain?
Here we go.
Local space.
Yeah, so John mentioned a little bit about it. We use a system we call PQS, which is admittedly not new technology. It was used in KSP1, and we took it, refined it, upgraded it, and optimized it for KSP2. So it's much, I'd say, less of a terrain system than it is just a procedural LOD system. Obviously, for performance reasons, you want bigger triangles. I think it was actually a good talk yesterday about why you do not want small triangles in the distance. So we want bigger triangles further away, smaller triangles up close, because we really want to create as immersive, as high definition, as high quality a local space read as we can. Like the bottom right image, like we want that and more. We want it to feel like any third-person, first-person AAA game you could go play when you're on the local space. And then we want to maintain that all the way up as you go up higher in the planet. So PQS is what we used, and then we used a procedural texturing system on it that I believe we go into shortly after this, or we'll talk in more detail about, that allows the artist to put their touch on this new terrain system.
Yeah, so for the artists, what was the process you all went through to get spherical, scaled, and local space terrain, both views in Unity?
So when we're creating our celestial bodies, we think of 3 tiers. We have scale space, large, and small. And with scale space, we actually create this in Substance Painter. We found that Substance Painter has very non-destructive workflow, and you have the ability to see the displacement of height map in real time. So you get a good idea of what our continents would look like in our game. We're using masks to create these height maps, and we can extract those masking into what's called our biomask. We have 4 biomes per planet. So for Kerbal, for example, we have grasslands, sand, snow, and mountains.
Yep.
And these biomass tell us where the details go, where the large scale detail goes, our small scale textures, and where our scatter system are applied. And during this phase, we also have, we quickly apply atmosphere and clouds just to, if the celestial body has atmosphere, just to gauge how it looks and get the feel. And at each level we'll talk about, we have fade ranges. So we have altitude sliders to say when we want the scale space to fade off. And we also have opacity on each end of like the ground and space. And with our terrain, we've also, the controls are like albedo and normal and gloss. And in scale space, you'll slightly see scale space in the local space just to help the transition that's important to our game.
Yeah, and to add to that, scaled space and creating that mesh in Painter and really getting that really worked out and fleshed out, it's important because it's usually the first step in like kind of establishing, kind of like to say, the personality of what the planet will look like. Like when we talk with leads in design, we look at the planet and we kind of decide, oh, okay, does this kind of meet design's needs for the landing puzzle? Does the distribution of biomes feel right? Does the colors feel like the mood of the planet that we want? What I like to say, like, and it informs so much about all the work we'll be doing forward, because we're going to be matching so much of our content on the local space work to match the scaled space. So like kind of what I like to say is, as a kind of a visual rule for like scaled to local space is, when you're looking at something from scaled space, from far away in space, the phrase is, what you see is what you get, right? So like if you see a green spot on the planet from scaled space, and you look at that and there's like a green spot and there's a crater there you can see from scaled space, the ideal is you look at that spot and go, I want to land on that green spot. And you fly all the way down and you go all the way down to the ground, and you can see that when you get to the ground, it is indeed green and there's a crater there. So we want to try to, like, again, a big part of our game is, again, like trying to make that transition as smooth as possible and things match.
In early phase of KSP2, we actually
yeah, it's funny. How can you tell someone is talking with a bunch going on in their head, count the ums and the uhs? Dude, I made it a thing a long time ago to remove that from, to whatever those neurons were that make you go, I made sure to remove that. The reason why I did is because, and once again, I'm not trying to dump on these guys. They're developers and public speakers, right? I have a lot of experience with public speaking, right? So I made it a thing to not mention this stuff, to not go like, I made it a thing to try and remove it as much as I can. Now, don't get me wrong, I still do it, but it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. You know what I mean? And I don't think it's good when you're trying to explain something. Now, don't get me wrong, when I'm in the middle of a stream, and it's a really long stream and I'm trying to explain something when I'm really tired, that's when I kind of just tail off like this, you know, I do that. But yeah, I really, really try to make it so I do not go, because in my line of work, it doesn't fly. Like, they're developers, it's fine, it's not a big deal. You speak pretty well. Thank you for letting us peek behind the curtain on that. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. Interjections are a natural part of speech. You do not have to say, but something will normally replace it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Created the planets.
Is the dark surface just a barrier while they work on the actual surface further down below? Okay, so they're using textures to make the terrain. This is called a height map. Okay? So when you're in scaled space, this is your colors here. So these colors, RGB and A, are used to denote different biomes. They're using red, green, blue, and alpha channel for different biomes. And this painted picture right here is what generates your terrain in scaled space. So basically, when you're orbiting around, it's using a texture to discern height. And that height map is being baked into a normal map, if I'm remembering this correctly. That's why in KSP2, when you're going around, you could see the depth of the mountains. You could see the mountains casting shadows and stuff. It's because of this right here. So this is a scaled space height map. So this is what KSP kind of looks like for its texture, for different biome texture. It's these three kind of overlaid over each other that give you this. Now, Kerbal also does use a height map to generate terrain in non-scaled space. They'll talk about that more in a second. I do my best to get comfortable with momentary silences during my conversations. What I do is I put pauses in naturally. Somebody said that, you know, you're going to replace that. I try to make sure that my speech is well paced. Because if you sit there and try to talk like this the entire time, and you try to talk as fast as you possibly can, and then you try to go as quick as you possibly can, and you try to overdo it, and you try to cook it, you cook the hand grenade too long, and then you lose your train of thought, and you don't know what you're talking about no more. I try to pace and speak slow on purpose. And I find that if I do that, if I lower the pace down, right, speak a little bit slower, add pauses in when you need to, catch your breath, basically, you communicate a lot more naturally. You know what I mean? Yeah. Pace your speech, dudes. Oh, yeah. People will... Dude, that makes such a big difference when you're trying to explain things to people. Pace your speech. I've been training myself to do it for a long time, and I still suck at it. I'm not the best. I sometimes go a little bit too fast. But that mostly is because I'm excited about what I'm talking about. But I've learned to not talk too fast when you're talking about something that you're hyped up on. Here's a bit of fun info. All human languages have roughly the same bit depth. That's weird, man. Bit rate, that is. No, I understand the pacing of the speech. That's weird. If you succeed in having the attention of your audience, pauses can actually help instead of filling with interjections. Bingo. Exactly, Gil. That's exactly it, man. You got it. That's one of the things that I use in my tool belt of explaining things. I pace stuff. Also, pacing out your speech and speaking slower is better for the people that don't speak English as their first language. That's why we have a lot of overseas viewers that don't necessarily speak the best English, but can still understand what I'm saying because I speak slow. I speak slow and I pace it. I don't speak too fast. Hey, Smart Chip. What's going on, buddy? All right, back to them.
Sculpting using ZBrush. But it was a way too destructive of a process because when we presented to our creative director and his design, they want to change something. It's a lot of work in ZBrush, so that's one reason why we switched to Painter.
Yeah.
And the last thing is that when we do the scaled space too, when we get to a point where we feel content with it and we're all feeling good about it, and then typically what me and Sung do is like even after we're done with the scaled space and we do move on to local space work, we still often have to go back to the scaled space because we find that, oh, that color green is way too much when you're on the ground. And so it's a constant back and forth process going between looking at the ground, flying up into space and evaluating it, looking back and forth between those two views. Again, all in the service of good transitions and seamless viewing of the planet.
I agree, Hazanku.
Yeah,
ZBrush
earlier when you were talking about
ZBrush would
scaled
have real
space,
trouble
you
doing
mentioned
something on that scale.
transition into like the large and medium textures. What's the goal of like this view of the planet or the celestial?
So see, this is what they're talking about. Kuro, you asked about like what does that information discern? So some of the shading there, basically, see what I mean? The height map information for the scaled space. So what Kerbal looks like when you're orbiting around it, or what Kerbal looks like when you're orbiting around it. You see how it casts shadows? See what I'm talking about? They take that height map information, and not only do they use it to generate terrain, but it's baked into what's called a normal map. And that normal map basically applies information to the texture to make it look like it's casting shadows. See the difference? So with Kerbal 1, you got something like this. With Kerbal 2, you get something like that. See the difference? I think they're taking the height map information, Umbre, and then they're applying a normal map to it, but you know what? I'm not sure about this part, so I'm actually going to listen to them. Yeah, all right. I've only just joined, but what I'm seeing, that RVGA image isn't a height map, but a mask that decides what height map, normal map to display on part of the mesh. Yeah, Jack, that would probably be a better way to explain it than the way I am, but yeah, there you go.
Body.
This is the large scale read, and after we export height map for the scale space, and then we can add details in. We can add height maps on top of that, and I think Brendan can talk about all the normal details here.
Buddy.
Right, yeah, right, ooh, sorry. Yeah, so if you look at those screenshots you see on the screen there, you can kind of see, like, if you compare the bottom left screenshot, that's kind of what like the terrain looks like without any kind of large scale normal map, large scale height map. And on the right side, you'll see it with like a large scale normal and a large scale height map. And these, I've been calling it a large scale texture. They are made in World Creator. They're basically these 1 to 3 kilometer big terrain textures that tile.
Chunks!
And the
It's not
idea
chunks.
with these is that each biome, like Sung was mentioning, Kerbal has 4 biomes. Each one of those biomes has
sausage fingers.
each biome on a planet throughout the game has one large-scale texture, and that texture is meant to represent the kind of signature geological feature of that biome. You see some this is the mountain biome, so you're going to see mountains. For like a desert, you may see like the large-scale texture may resemble something like big giant sand dunes, or for like a grassland biome, it might be rolling hills or flowing like fluvial erosion patterns. Or like for the Mun, like one of its biomes might be a bunch of craters
Fluvial
as for one of its
erosion
biomes.
patterns. Very nice.
Yeah, and the reason why we chose World Creator as our kind of method of choice for generating these large-scale textures was mainly out of the box. World Creator allows you to create tiling height maps, which again, like we need the tiling again to wrap around the planet because it's so much area. But also, like because we tile it, we have the flexibility of messing with the scale of the tiling rate and to get the feel of what we want the terrain to be like when you're on the ground.
And initially, at the large-scale level, we also, currently what you see is just the normal detail. But at first, we also had albedo information. We also had glass information as well. But we found that we can strip away the albedo and glass, and all of the albedo information you see here is
Sorry,
from
Zarby.
small scale.
I should have mentioned the public speaking thing after this, dude. I'm distracted. Chat's getting super distracted. Sorry, guys. I apologize, man. Sorry. My fault. Try your best.
It was just, less textures and just less work for us artists.
Yeah, let's talk about those
Shai.
small textures once you get up close. Like, when would you interact with this level of scale?
Right. So at scale space, when you're heading down towards the ground is when you start seeing those small scale textures.
Yep.
And there are 4 sets of textures per
Farm, you
biome.
be good now.
We found that 4 provided good enough texture diversity to get
It's
the look
different
and
when
feel
there's
we
people in
wanted.
front of you, Neon. Absolutely.
Us artists we wanted more, but the programmers were like, no. Perf reasons, understandable.
Oh, yeah, Ombre,
I
that's a good one.
understand.
Yeah.
Albedo is your base colors. Yeah, sorry about. Yeah, Ombre, I should have explained that. My bad. But yeah, thank you.
And on the bottoms, you can kind of see like our
They could
thought
make it
process of
seasonal
how
poison,
we
sure.
apply small scale textures. You can see ones like we just start with grass. This is the mountain biome.
Thing on a
Then
spring.
we added rocks. Then we added dirt and snow caps. And at the end, you can see scatter.
So it's important to mention, guys, that Kerbal wouldn't have seasons. Kerbal does not have seasons because it's 0 degrees inclined to the sun. No seasons. The reason why Earth has seasons is because, well, weather patterns and a bunch of other things, but Earth has a 27-degree axial tilt. That's why we have seasons. Planet that has a north and south pole that is perfectly parallel to the star that it's orbiting around, south pole, would not have seasons. In fact, Kerbal would probably be desert at the equator around the entire planet if, it was kind of real. It's way too close to the sun. Think about it like the northern parts of Africa. The entire equatorial region of Kerbal would look like that. Yeah. How cold is Mars? Mars can get, when it's warm, Jackal, Mars can get like minus 30 C when it's warm. Like, keep in mind that's at an extremely low pressure, and like when it gets cold, it can get death, like Locke's cold. Hey Tubbs, what's going on, man? It's crazy how good Earth is to harvest life. It really is kind of it's quiet. Too quiet, Pop. It's kind of nuts how, like, dude, a little bit closer you got Venus, a little bit further away you get Mars. Earth is in the Goldilocks zone. That's what planetary scientists call it. It's called the Goldilocks zone. The Goldilocks zone is the ideal distance from any given type of star that has a planet with the temperatures that are good enough to support carbon-based life forms, which is what we are.
And with small-scale textures,
Something like
we
that,
had
Tessa,
these procedural tools, and in terms of height, slope, peak, and weight.
It's getting there, Tubbs. Right now, I'm not playing KSP. We'll get back to it in a moment, but the KSP2 development team did a presentation at GDC about how they generate planets, and I love the game a lot, and I love kind of this background stuff. I'm not entirely sure if we should be in the KSP2 category, but if you have questions about KSP2, how to play or anything like that, dude, I got you. I played the trash out of Kerbal 1. So if you're like trying to figure out how to rendezvous something or whatever, like Tubbs, I don't think you are, but just in case, that goes for anybody here. You reminded me. Yeah, guys, I have 15,000 hours in KSP1. So please, like, if you have questions about KSP2, ask away. I'm here. Right now, I'm learning basically about what's under the hood with KSP2 because this is important stuff to learn because it'll make me better at playing the game.
Yeah, so for those of you at home keeping count, we have 4 biomes, and then each of those biomes has 4 textures in it. And, well, no, not just 4. It has the large scale, the mid scale, and 4 small textures in it.
Oh, Tubbs.
As well, so it's a very delicate balance in order to give the artist the fidelity to create really beautiful, like I said, these immersive local reads that when you're on a planet, it feels like any other third-person game. But then we always have to calculate the balance out of that with.
Yeah, and each texture set is like albedo, normal, gloss, height, AO. So times.
Yeah, so not just one of those. Yeah, multiply
right,
those
so
by
it's a lot.
5, and then you'll understand why it's such a planetary effort to texture the entire planet. But yeah, so we messed around with a lot of procedural texturing that enabled us to not, like I mentioned earlier, have to deal with massively large texture files and have texture reused to allow us to provide detail over the biomes as necessary.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so this panel is obviously a mix of artists and engineers and tech artists. What was the relationship between like the graphics programming team and the art team? Oh,
Good
Sorry,
one.
yeah. I have one more note about small scale textures that's kind of fun to know about. So we also implement this technique for looking at small scale textures as a way of coming to help mitigate tiling. The technique is called distance resampling, and the whole idea behind that is when you see things, when you have a Kerbal on scale on the ground, let's assume like the UV scale of textures, the small scale textures around the Kerbal is like 1. What we do is that we set the UV scale of the small scale textures to be different sizes depending on what altitude you are above the ground. So for example,
It could happen, Tubbs.
after you're so if you're on the ground, the UV scale is 1, let's say about either in the distance 50 meters or like 100 meters in the air, we may set the UV scale for the small scale textures to be something more like 0.8 or 0.5. So it has the kind of effect of like making the textures bigger. And we have at least 4 different scales of this as you go up into space. And what this does is, if we didn't have this,
Change the resolution
what
of the
happens
texture.
is like the texture scale just stays at 1 constantly as you go high into the air, it makes tiling a lot more visible. But because like the tiling rate kind of changes and lerps smoothly between one UV scale to another as you're going up.
It's exactly
it has
what
the
we
effect
learned
of
about
kind of
him.
mitigating that tiling.
I know what they're saying. Like I can understand pretty dang well. Don't get me wrong. I'm a little far out of the gate, so there are some things that they're saying where I'm like, huh? But I understand what he's talking about. He's talking about UV texture scale here. So, okay. What are UVs? UVs are a form of it's not a 3D geometry per se, but it is basically what you use to assign texture information to a 3D mesh, okay? So think about it if I have a gift that I want to give somebody, like a present. You know, it's in a cardboard box, right? The cardboard box is your 3D model with no texture information assigned to it. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, if you just go into a CAD program and you make a cube, that will have UV information assigned to it from the start, and it'll work fine. But say I made that cardboard box myself. Say I moved the cube around and made it from like a perfect cube to maybe like a rectangle, like a shoebox or something, right? Now, Maya or whatever, Blender or whatever, that does not understand that I stretched the textures there. So that texture information, if I go to apply it, it's going to look like you took texture information and stretched it, right? UVing in that regard and doing UVs for models is like wrapping this present that we made. We have a shoebox and we need to wrap it up. We need to wrap it up into a gift. So you have to take a 2D plane, your wrapping paper, and find a way to wrap it over the mesh, right? Now, with that shoebox, that's pretty easy, right? You cut out, basically you take the surface area of all the sides and you cut it out in a way where you can get the paper to fold up and over. You wrap your present, essentially, right? That's pretty straightforward stuff. Now do that with a sphere. How are you going to wrap a sphere? How are you going to do that? Say in your video game, you wanted one of the main characters to have a baseball, and they throw the baseball. How are you going to get the texture to not stretch on there? Because remember, you have to take a 2D texture and wrap it around a 3D model. UVs denote how that 2D texture wraps around a 3D model. Now, when he's talking about scale here, he's essentially talking about the scale is, it's not texture resolution. The scale of it is how, because like when you get further away, when you're in small texture mode like this, it renders, it starts to not render 3D geometry, right? It's starting to render more texture. That's, the scale is how often it repeats. Like if you have tiles, think about if you're tiling like a bathroom, right? And you decide to use a little mosaic tile as opposed to a bigger tile, right? Now that big tile could have a picture of me doing this on it, and that smaller tile will have a picture of me doing this on it, right? And there, if you use the smaller tile, there's going to be a lot more. But if you use the bigger tile, there's going to be a lot less, but it'll, you won't see as much repeating, right? Because there's less. That's what he's talking about. What kind of sphere? Polar or geodesic? Shut the heck up, Bedesic. UVs are difficult, man. It's hard to do UVs. Yeah, that's a really, really big part of 3D modeling. It's tedium, guys. That's the tedium. It's the tedious part. Hey, Zigatoto, what's going on? UVs are boring. It takes a long time. Because once again, UV is basically denoting how your custom-made 3D model is going to have texture information assigned to it. Now, think about a character. Any character in any video game. Think about a character, like a character in Call of Duty, right? The character in Call of Duty isn't just wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt like me, right? That character in Call of Duty has backpacks, you have mag pouches, you have the weapon, right? You have a crazy face mask. That maybe your character is like a grizzled beard or something, right? All that texture information has to get assigned, and if you don't assign it right, it's going to look like they've had a facelift. Or the pouch, the mag pouch on their side, or like the holster for your sidearm, right? Is going to look like...
Discovery, go at throttle.
It's going to look like someone smeared paint all over the gun, like, because the texture is going to be stretched. Right? Think about that. Every single character in every video game that you play had to have been UV'd. And on top of that, just on a side note, if you're doing a character model, right? So like take a look at like your hand, right? Your skin, when you make a fist, right? Your skin stretches over your knuckles just a little bit. That squash and stretch has to work right. See the skin, your skin's moving around your knuckle, right? It stretches because you can move your fingers around. Same with your elbows. Same with your shoulders, right? All of that texture information has to be able to survive doing this, right? Say you have a character with a firearm that's going bop 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 bop. You have to make their finger do this if you want it to be shown. Doing that and getting the texture information on a finger to work correctly is really difficult stuff. You have to basically make the geometry and UV it in a way that's designed that basically doesn't squash the mesh when you're doing this. It's really, really hardcore stuff. That's the reason why I didn't do character modeling when I went to school. I did hard surface modeling because it's easier, because it's non-deformable. It's tough, man. This is hard stuff to do. Like trying to do hands and getting skin to stretch in 3D geometry around a hand, that's really difficult. That's really hard to do. So like think about what your skin is doing, right? If you take your arm, I know, I still have the gnarliest farmer's tan, and do this, right? Think about all the skin moving over your muscles, right? That's a lot of deformation here. That's hard to do with 3D. Tell them about normal baking. Oh, low-key flex. Yeah, look at this. Oh, yeah, I'm flexing real hard right now. Turns out that sitting in front of a computer for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week isn't the most healthy thing that you can do. My brain hurts, even though I do some 3D printing and modeling. Yeah. Normal baking, yeah, hard pass.
But also, when those small scale textures are kind of stretched enough, it ends up creating this kind of interesting, you get this interesting kind of
Panderific. Good idea.
Kind of mid-level texture. It kind of gives the terrain more of like a macro kind of texture, which again just ends up creating a good look.
Darylyn,
just to reinforce that,
a neural net to be able to do UVing stuff for me would be great. That would be excellent, man. I would be a great modeler. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if someone's working on that right now. Something to UV stuff for you. UVing takes so much time, dude. Oh, God. It's so difficult.
The resampling was necessary to add the blending between it because, like, if we did that just based purely on your altitude and not the distance, as you moved up, like, you would see the textures of the whole world move below you with this. So we had to, like, implement that distance blending as well in order to account for both as you're close, you'll see small textures, and as you're far, you'll see the wide UVs. And it massively helps with tiling, too, and avoids us having to use expensive anti-tiling techniques.
So you can tell how closely these artists and engineers work together. Yeah, if you guys could just expand on that relationship that you guys had in the studio as you developed these celestial bodies and the tools.
Yeah, for one, be nice to your graphics team because they're the ones that are providing us artists to make cool stuff. And
that's cool.
Second is
the decal control.
Make sure you have, when you're developing tools the artist wants, make sure you're showing good examples of what you want.
Yeah, UV as you
so
go.
On the far right
that's
image,
the way to
you get
that's
a
the way to do
kind
it.
of glimpse of us artist workflow. We actually mocked up a UI of how we want our terrain shader to work, and be very specific of how you want the graphics programmers to implement the tools you want. In terms of like order, the way you want it, the color scheme, because the terrain shader has hundreds of settings, it was important for us artists to quickly go to the section we wanted. So we made sure everything was colorized. Another example is we have tons of biomes, and we wanted the ability just to work on one biome, because we found that we constantly were actually touching textures that was in a different biome. So having a setting that says, hey, make this biome exclusive was very important. The sliders, any spec of details for the terrain textures specs you want. I would say for artists, communicate and show real examples to your graphics team to get the tools you want.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, you obviously have the other end where it's like, as graphics programmers or just software engineers in general, sometimes when artists come to you and they're like, hey, we need a tool that allows us to do this, you're like, okay. And then you just take all the variables that you have and you just make them public in Unity, and it's just like, all right, go wild. You can literally touch everything, go for it. And then they're like, all right, I moved this and it turned black and it exploded or flipped everything inside out. And it's like, okay. So we actually need to put some thought into hand making the tools and polishing them up. It is not wasted work, and it makes their lives much easier. It cuts back on the the throwing back. Like, we're all the same team here, so it's not like throwing over the fence, but it still can cause like a, hey, I was trying to make this look and I couldn't get it to work. Oh, I'll tell them move this slider like this, but when it's labeled properly, executed, and the mockups did a massive help for eliminating that between us. So I can just say, oh, okay, this is what you want, I'll get this for you, and then it becomes a question of, do you need this exposed rather than, I'm just going to expose you everything. And then
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback
What?
off the point of having a good reference point or mock-up of like how to create tools, a other thing we did is we looked at a lot of existing like external tools to like help inform what our controls look like. So for example, like for the way we wanted procedural texturing to work on our small-scale textures, we looked a lot at World Creator because we really enjoyed, like me and Sung really enjoyed using those controls to like make masks or to create like snow tops on mountains, that kind of thing. And so we essentially looked at a lot of those controls and used those as the model for the mock-ups for how we wanted procedural texturing to work in our game. Another example of that is I think we use Quixel Mixer as like our reference point for how we want the controls for small-scale textures for blending. There we have like, yeah, it's a good practice just to, because again, it keeps everyone on the same page when you're looking at the same thing and it's doing the same function that we're all looking at, and it's a very good concrete example. Helps communication very much.
yeah, and then to piggyback also on the topic of communication, it's also very important just because sometimes the artists will ask like, hey, they'll see with reference tools like, hey, we could do this in this tool, like this changes this, can you give us that functionality? And then we unfortunately have to have the unfortunate conversation of, no, we can't actually do that, that's not possible. Or sometimes, yeah, but this is how much work it'll take. Or, yeah, we could actually do that, it'll be pretty trivial. So you really gotta knowing what they're after, and then also you gotta keep performance in your head as an engineer. And unfortunately, you do have to give them the bad news sometimes that, no, you cannot have that toy, and I'm sorry.
They're like our parents. We're like, we want more sugar. But they're like, no, we can't. It's perf.
Okay.
All right, John, I'm throwing this question directly at you.
Engineers are not good at dealing with artists. You physically take the specs from the artists to the engineers. Well, no, I sometimes take or they're faxed. What would you say you do here?
Given that we have to light an entire Kerbaler system, what were the considerations you have to make when designing a system like that?
Yeah, first things for considering lighting that I first thought were, let's start with the star. We want a big source light, the biggest ball of plasma in the sky. We'll start with Kerbal. So intuitively, it's like, oh yeah, directional light, and then it follows you around as you go around the universe. As you get further away, it attenuates. And my first thought was, oh, we're in like a dynamic sim. Why not have this sort of like tied to a function where it's very hard-coded distances, like lighting fall off is like, more realistic in a way. But as I learned, once the artists had it in their hands, they're like, oh, it's like way too bright by Moho, way too dark far away at Elu. It's like, can we get away from this function and have like more artist-tunable functions? So instead, we opted out for just a fall-off curve and a distance value. So it's like very simple, but it works as you go through the universe. It gets dimmer. That's great.
The spray?
Next step is when you get closer to.
I'll be right back. 1 second, guys.
Oh, here.
Yeah. When you get closer, we'll say, like, because in this example, it's Kerbin, the Mun and Minmus. There's a bunch of different celestial bodies with different terrains, lighting parameters. And again, my first thought was like, oh, it's like a function, everything has different fall-offs. And again, the artist wanted more tunable control over the specific celestial bodies. Like, so the lighting that was on Kerbin, when it was set to Mun, since the Mun is more like lighter colors, it was like feeling very blown out, very hard to play, essentially. So a lot of back and forth with me and the artists on lighting to figure out what is the best way to balance that level of like dynamic lighting that feels realistic while also having like an intuitive player-facing gameplay appeasing sort of lighting scenario. So like having different overrides per planet. So like while they do have the fall off still, the artists can opt in or out of an override. So as you leave Kerbin and enter like Mun's SOI, I have those values of like maybe Kerbin has like 100% of Kerbal light, and that looks good for it. But as you get into like Mun's SOI and load in like the Mun terrain in all of its detail, it drops down to like 65 because that feels more of like the moon from reference footage that we've seen.
And SOI is sphere of influence.
The sphere of influence is the physics bubble, essentially, that when your vessel enters, it then utilizes like that planet's gravity. It's like it's matched.
It's attracted to the center of the spinning celestial body.
We have so many three-letter acronyms in our game.
Yeah, we do. I'm sorry.
The game itself.
The game itself is an acronym.
So yeah, as like I mentioned, we have a lot of additional lightings. You know, besides directional lighting, there's bounce lighting and like a planet shine. So a tool we implemented was spherical harmonics to help with the diffuse lighting on our planets. So as Joule rises in the sky while you're on Lathe, there's more green affecting the terrain. Something we had to do for our game was modify how we sampled the spherical harmonics, because Unity's native L2 had some backbleeding issues when the intensity was too high, because the artist really wanted to push like the really green at night, because it's like we want to really sell that emotional feel. So that was definitely a consideration we had to take on. We also looked into how to do occlusion and eclipses. So if Joule is in the sky, but you're orbiting Lathe and Lathe covers Joule, you don't want any of that green light. So we utilized just some very simple like circular math and sorting to figure out when things were fully occluded, to figure out like a percentage visibility to allow for like that color to attenuate.
Cool.
Yes. And finally, the last bit of lighting that we looked into was global illumination and how we could have a sort of quick and low-cost bounce light at all times. Luckily, since the scaled space is always there, we can actually render it to a cube map where the camera is. You'll see that in the left image on like the top left at the KSC. You'll see like the green ground of Kerbal and the blue sky. This cube map is always generated as our way of getting like a real-time bounce light. And then because Unity is Y up, but our game is not, we had to also factor in the orientation of the transform matrix into our rendering to then sample that. So what we had to do was modify some of the back end and modify Unity's standard shader to get the results that we wanted. What we do for our planets, all of our scenery, is have the custom GI pass go through and sample this cube map at different MIP levels. So for like diffuse lighting, it'll be a lower MIP, so it kind of blurs it out to get a better look of like bounce light. But for something specular like the ocean, it's higher, so you actually get a more like one-to-one type of reflection look. Since we are in the built-in render pipeline as of early access launch, we didn't have access to HDRP sort of like scripted render pipeline stuff. And as you'll see on the right side of the right image it's very similar to Unity's lighting window, but expanded to include all of our additional properties for artist tuning. So like cube map intensity and like their MIP levels and how we sample them.
Awesome, yeah. So going forward, where do you guys want to take and develop these tools throughout early access?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about earlier when I was talking about the PQS and how it was the system we used in Kerbal 1, and we did take it, optimized it, multi-threaded it, threw it behind compute shaders as much as we could, but we sort of hit the limit for at least artistic capacity with it. So we're investigating a new terrain system, or I guess terrain meshing LOD system that'll allow us to get a better breakup of those LODs, and it'll allow us to split the mesh up into more manageable chunks, because we were talking about the amount of textures we need for the single shader. If we split the mesh up into multiple shaders, it'll allow us to give the artist more toys to play with, so they can make even more interesting planets, like from higher numbers of biomes than 4. But
What?
yeah, I know, crazy. We can do that for you.
Oh my
It's
God.
super exciting for us artists. I think with any project, you always find yourself limited with the tools and the engine you're using. And we've already got a preview of what's possible, so it's very exciting for us.
Yeah, I'm super pumped. Pun intended. I feel it will unlock a whole new world of possibility of like a level of detail that we can achieve, and just like getting good, not only great detail, but just making it seamless. Like again, from local space, scaled space, any distance.
Yeah, and as we investigate things like HDRP more and more to get the lighting that we really want with this game, to get that level of like stylized realism we're looking for, I'm really excited to like have that back and forth with the artist to see like just what we can get at like physically based cameras, all the post-processing it offers. It's going to be a fun journey.
What's
Definitely
that, Karen?
is. And so thank you all for listening to our chat here about spherical celestial bodies. Kerbal Space Program 2 is currently in early access and playable via Steam, Epic Games Store, and our private division web store online. We just released patch 1 last week.
This was a
patch
little
notes
while ago.
contain like over 250 bug fixes, so check it out. It's nuts. We've also got a slew of new features planned throughout early access, such as science mode, which will introduce a campaign, colonies, interstellar travel, and multiplayer as we lead up.
Steven, this generation says like a lot. They're not public speakers, man. They're developers. I'm sure if you put these folks not in front of an audience of 100 people, kind of cold turkey, I'd think they'd be okay. You know, I think they'd be all right.
To 1.0. If you're interested in checking it out before going home, head down to the expo hall. Thank you to Unity for inviting us here for the sponsor session and also for hosting a demo station down in the expo hall. You can play that first patch of our game right now. And as a thank you all for sitting through this talk, I've got some never before seen images on this slide of a brand new Kerbal Space Program 2 celestial body that does not exist in Kerbal Space Program 1. We'll be introducing it during that interstellar update. Say hi to Gerdama. I think we've shown this off a little bit in our developer diaries. But Gerdama is a high-pressure, heavily cratered celestial body from the Deb system. It has oceans of water, 2 rings, and not 1, but 2 moons. So,
damn.
Can't you wait to explore it? All right.
Yes, I'm here for the planetary exploration.
Thank you all. I think we've got some time here, maybe 15 more minutes for questions. If anyone has a question.
You see this? I want to do this. See that? I want to make SPAC station. Space dry dock, please. It's in the pipeline, Jackal, yeah. I got 4 words for you. I love this company! Yeah!
I believe we've got 2 different mics. We'll probably bounce between them. Again, thank you so much to Unity, as well as our Unity engineers that Unity basically rented out to us. Skip Petty and Patrick DeVarney. They're amazing. They've been working very, very closely with this team to get us optimized
That's
and
a bum
performant.
channel.
Evaluations.
There's no SpaceX Live channel. There's only SpaceX.
Oh, don't forget to fill out your evaluations. Everyone leaving. Fill out your evaluations for this talk. Thank you. All right, let's start it off right here.
Hi.
Hi.
The talks was very inspiring.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you, what about coordinate system and scaling in the space? Because we have the same problem on the terrain, because we have the floating point same problem.
Yeah, so I can answer that to just repeat it. The question was about coordinate systems and scaling on terrain. So that's one of the things actually in the new terrain system that we're looking into. We're planning on using the data structure S2,
Turbo.
which is I think something that was either developed by Google Maps or Amazon and used to map the real world down to a precision of I think 1 centimeter square. So for our new coordinate system, or for the new terrain system that we'll be using, we're going to be using that in order to sample our locations on the various height maps. So I believe that's like, it's laid out in a recursive fashion. So like when you know one level of detail, you know the adjacent areas in level of detail, and the lookup's extremely fast on it. It's lighter on storage than normal Cartesian coordinates or polar. And yeah, so, but at the current time, we're not using that. I believe we're just using Cartesian coordinates with double precision. But yeah, so that's, if you want the future solution, that's probably the one, the S2. But for the current time, we're just using double precision Cartesian.
Thank you. Thank you.
They're using double, not float.
Yeah, you're good. It's all at this front mic. Don't worry about it.
There's a mic behind me. Hello, I love to talk. I had a question pertaining to a certain slide a while back. If you could flip, it was a slide that had like the 4 biomes, and they were encoded into like RGBA.
Oh yeah, let me find that. Hang on. This guy?
Yes, that's the one. maybe it's just me being stupid and not understanding, but so you have in the channels grassland, sand, snow, mountains. How do you represent water texture? Is that done separately somehow?
So yeah, that's the sand is where the water would go.
Oh,
Yeah.
I guess that, sure.
And so there's a lot of stuff we didn't even touch, like how our water system works. But we do have since we have terrain and our water, we have another mesh just for water. Yeah. And in scale space, we actually just paint on water because in scale space you're just seeing a single mesh, right? So yeah, it's just painted on in terms of scale space.
Okay, yeah, that does answer my question.
Yeah, and there's another point to that too. When we're authoring the scaled space mesh, like in Painter, we can usually dictate okay, at a certain height value, but anywhere below that, we can just know that's going to be water. So that way, we can deserts definitely generally, or the sand where is definitely generally where it correlates where water could go, but the scaled space height map of Kerbal, anywhere where it's below a certain height threshold, we can assume it's going to be water, just because if the water is a perfect sphere and the scaled space mesh is going up and down, up and down, up and down, and if it's below a certain height, the water will be above it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Okay, thank you.
Good question.
You're welcome.
Continuing with the water, at local space, how did you manage to keep the shorelines consistent as you go through the LOD changes?
Yeah. So how did
not
you
sure you
keep
can do that on
coastlines
Or they could
consistent
use a
between
local
scaled and
decal
local
mask.
space?
Not in scaled and local, but
Just
in local through LOD changes. As you get closer to the space, the resolution changes, and so does the height of the water mesh and the terrain will not consistently match.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of work on that just because it's I think you would know this, that it's an inherent problem of when you get a lower resolution, the triangle is going to be different from the LOD and it's going to be visually different. So one thing I think we did, we texture underneath it as you go up the same color that it would be. So even though the LOD changes, where on the triangle that it would be colored is actually the color it's supposed to be. But it's not a problem we have fully solved because you could even see in the game if you fly straight up, there will be some very specific spots that unfortunately you'll see that tessellation happen. And there's probably alternative solutions that we could look into for it, but at the moment it was mainly just the blending of that water texture and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We should repeat the questions.
Oh yeah.
My question is, I'm wondering the extent to which you guys have used geospatial data in your workflows. I mean, obviously, the hyper realism of some of those scenes is really beautiful, but to the extent that you're using digital elevation model data, or even just for 2D texturing, instead of writing graphics shaders, to use the actual 2D textures from Mother Nature, I just wonder if there's any use of that given the focus on realism.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Early in the project, we've experimented a bit with using satellite height map data to help try to create patches of terrain. But it always kept coming back to how do we tile this across the planet? How do we do this in a way that scales to planet scale, right? So we found that we could again get little patches that looked good, but in the end we ended up going through the workflow of using World Creator. And more going the procedural route rather than using a lot of real life captured data. But I'd say with our scaled space workflow, sometimes we integrate a little bit of that satellite data, images from space that can add a lot of kind texture or kind of material to a scaled space view of a planet. But for the local space, I don't think we use that much.
Yeah, it was also there's a double-edged sword using real-life source because while it does look good, it is hard to extract masking that we need for a game, right? So we could have used tons of texture from the moon, but we need the height data and the masking data to make our biomask. So it would have been a lot of hand-painted work that was. We didn't want to do all that. It was
Work smart, not hard.
Work smart, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just wondering, because it sounds like pretty much everything you're doing is just doing tons and tons and tons of distance checks. So is there a way that you either preemptively avoided just the expense of doing tons of distance checks all at once, or that you mitigated the effects of doing that?
Not really. Just the question was, we're doing distance resampling, and in a game like this, we're checking how far we are from something a lot of the time.
That's what's
and the reality is, it's actually surprisingly not that intensive. So like the terrain shader, like I said, we do the distance resampling, but that's like one shader pass, and so it has the information at the start to like whatever pixel. Actually, depth textures. So the depth texture will give you a nice, all that information already, how far you are from where you're at. And since that's the way we render the planet, we generate the geometry for it first and then do the texturing. So since we already have the geometry information, we can basically generate a depth map for the planet already in camera space. And then you don't need to actually do distance like checking like that. It's already built in. You could just sample the depth texture when you're doing the texture reads.
Yeah, because the planet shader itself is multipass, so we kind of anticipate the data that we'll need, so we like get it out of the way to then utilize it later.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So you mentioned having a multiplayer update. How are you balancing the dynamicism of the texture engine versus like what a person locally perceives and what gets replicated?
I need to listen to that question again.
Balance.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. So you mentioned having a multiplayer update. How are you balancing the dynamicism of the texture engine versus like what a person locally perceives and what gets replicated?
I don't understand.
Ooh, I wish we had a multiplayer engineer up here. I can say that we've got a multiplayer team who's basically building multiplayer out concurrently all the way throughout, prior to now and up through early access to make sure that we're solving these answers along the way as features go in.
Verifying like any check-in, we check in, make sure it's like
multiplayer
hey, how
approved.
Will this work in multiplayer now? Does this have any implications for multiplayer? It's like always questions we ask at every stage of the check-ins.
Yeah.
I think, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to explain it, I'm trying to understand. I think the question there was basically, how do you make it so if there's two people playing in the game that you're not rendering the same environment 2 times? Because Kerbal is entirely based around your spacecraft, right? And it's not your spacecraft orbiting around a celestial body so much as the celestial body's orbiting around your spacecraft. Like your spacecraft is the focal point of the game, right? Now, don't get me wrong, that's not exactly how it works, but that's kind of why, like, you have to do, like, with multiplayer, you have to do syncing. Like, if you're playing dark multiplayer in KSP1 and you go to Duna, and then a little bit later somebody else goes to Duna, you have to sync those two together, right? Because only when you get kind of close to each other in the same kind of realm around Duna or something is where when the other spacecraft's going to end up being there. So I'm pretty sure that was like, how do you make it so you're not rendering 2 things twice when 2 people are in kind of your spacecraft scene, so to speak. I think I might be wrong.
Yeah. I wish I could answer your question in more detail, but
no worries.
Eric Malota would love to be here and answer that for you.
I can at least talk a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Which is, for our visual systems, a lot of them are like observer focused. So we've designed those systems to be like, this current player will see these things, they'll be rendered this kind of way because it's their version of the game that they're seeing. Like they don't have to worry about what other players see. So in that regards, like your own computer just handles rendering. In terms of like physics and like the client itself, that'll be, I don't know how it's handled. It likely is like the host, and then from there it'll solve the issues that come up.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Why would it not render twice with 2 players? That's so idiotic. Well, consort, if you're flying around with another person, and you're both flying around KSC, if your client is rendering KSC 2 times and their client is rendering KSC 2 times, you're rendering KSC 3 extra times that don't matter. See what I'm talking about? So you're rendering it once for yourself and once for the other guy. And the other guy is rendering it once for themselves and then once for you. Does that make sense? Now you've rendered it 4 times. That's useless. That's just a waste. You only need to render it once. See what I'm talking about? And I know that seems like, dude, there's no way it works like that. Well, it'll work like that unless you figure out a solution to that problem. You know, if you have 2 clients that are flying around, right, and then they both get near KSP at the same time,